for a small fee in America.
Buying on credit is so nice.
One look at us and they charge twice.
I'll have my own washing machine.
What will you have, though, to keep clean?
Skyscrapers bloom in America. Cadillac zoom in America. Industry boom in America.
12 in a room in America.
Lots of new housing with more space.
Lots of doors slamming in our face.
I'll get a terrace apartment.
Better get rid of your accent.
Life can be bright in America.
If you can fight in America.
Life is alright in America.
If you're all white in America.
Here you are free and you have pride.
Long as you stay on your own side.
Free to be anything you choose.
Free to wear tables and shine shoes. Everywhere crime in America. Organized crime in America. Terrible time in America.
You forget I'm in America.
I think I go back to San Juan.
I know a boat you can get on. Bye-bye.
Everyone there will give big cheers.
Everyone there will have moved here.
America from West Side Story. Welcome again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vretos. I'm a sociologist who teaches at John Jay College and Yeshiva University here in New York. If there's any justification for a belief in American exceptionalism, that unique message that supposedly explains what America is all about and what makes us different and proud to be Americans, it's rooted in the American Revolution, the abolitionist movement, the labor movement, the Vietnam anti-war movement, the suffragette movement, the welfare rights movement, the civil rights movement, the Attica Rebellion, the Young Lords and Black Panther parties, the New Poor People's Campaign, and countless attempts by ordinary Americans who collectively rose up in anger and hoped to defy dominant authorities by speaking truth to power. The form these expressions might take sometimes came out most beautifully in poetry, art, and music. America, after all, is an ongoing living experiment, an experience of complex paradoxes and contradictions. It has tended to be an optimistic culture, at times naive and crude, at other times soaring and liberating. In 1957, one of those iconic moments of liberating beauty exploded onto the Broadway stage with the production of West Side Story. With music by Leonard Bernstein and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, it was inspired by Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet and set in the Upper West Side neighborhood in New York City in the mid-50s. It was an ethnic, blue-collar neighborhood. Much of it was cleared in an urban renewal project for Lincoln Center, which changed the neighborhood's character dramatically. The musical explains the rivalry between the Jets and the Sharks, two teenage street gangs of different ethnic backgrounds. The members of the Sharks, from Puerto Rico, are taunted by the Jets, a white gang. The young protagonist, Tony, a former member of the Jets and best friend of the gang's leader, Riff, falls in love with Maria, the sister of Bernardo, the leader of the Sharks. This dark theme, sophisticated music, extended dance scenes, and focused on social problems marked a turning point in American musical theater. The production was nominated for 6 Tony Awards, including Best Musical in 1957. A 1961 musical film adaptation was nominated for 11 Academy Awards and won 10, a record for a musical, including Best Picture. My guests on the Radical Imagination today, through their struggles and liberating affirmations of life, represent the best of what American exceptionalism is, should be, and what it can be. They are two of the most dynamic, creative, and prophetic visionary voices in the Latino American community today and understand full well the complexities and nuances of the West Side Story. Felipe Luciano is a prolific American poet of African Puerto Rican heritage who, as a member of the Last Poets, a group of Black Power era artists mentored by Amin Baraka, created politically charged live music and spoken word poetry performances in the 60s that led to the emergence of hip-hop and rap in the 70s and 80s. He's a community activist, journalist, media personality, former NBC TV New York news anchor, and a founding member of the New York branch of the Young Lords Party. He grew up in East Harlem and lives just a few blocks from our eminent studios here on East 104th Street. Felipe also found the time to recently complete, it was 2014, right? A Master's of Divinity at Union Theological Seminary, where we met in those cloistered halls a few years ago. Bobby Sanabria is a Latin American jazz drummer of Puerto Rican descent who's a percussionist, composer, arranger, conductor, producer, educator, documentary filmmaker, activist, and band leader for the Multiverse Big Band. Born and raised in New York's Melrose housing projects in the South Bronx, Bobby was the drummer for the acknowledged creator of Afro-Cuban jazz, Mario Bauza, and is a 7-time Grammy nominee for his work. His latest recording, released in July of 2018, is a monumental Latin jazz reworking of the entire score of West Side Story. He's entitled it West Side Story Reimagined on the Jazz Heads label, in celebration of the show's recent 60th anniversary, 2017, and as composer, Maestro Leonard Bernstein's centennial in 2018. Partial proceeds from the sale of this historic double CD set goes to the Jazz Foundation of America's Puerto Rican Relief Fund to aid Bobby's ancestral homeland after the devastation from Hurricanes Irma and Maria, added to by the gross negligence of the Trump administration. Now, before we meet Felipe and Bobby, here's a short clip of Bobby and Jamie Bernstein discussing their work.
It's true that over the course of my life, I've heard many different takes on West Side Story music and different interpretations and versions. When I heard Bobby's version, my head pretty much exploded because it was really the most ambitious reimagining of the music that I had ever heard. And the sheer force of it, because there are so many members of the orchestra and so much percussion and so much forward motion, I just was overwhelmed. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard, and I was only sorry that my dad wasn't there to hear it too.
Well, the one thing about Maestro Bernstein's music in West Side Story is that it has a lot of kinetic energy, and obviously it lends itself to movement, to dance, etc. But now we're even adding more colors to it and heightening the tension, the excitement, the drama, and of course, with the new rhythms that we've added, it's even more exciting than before.
Well, my dad was very open-minded and open-hearted about reinterpreting his music. I think he would love the way Bobby sort of ratcheted the whole thing up to express his own emotions about the world we all live in today. And if my father were living today, I can only imagine that he'd be sort of apoplectic and would be only too thrilled to hear his music expressing, you know, today's version of the themes that we hear in West Side Story.
Maestro Bernstein, he knew Tito Puente personally, Machito, Tito Rodriguez. So he was intimately involved with that music and that culture. But today what I've done in this new reimagining is added rhythms that are native to Puerto Rico, from the bomba tradition like yuban and sica, and we have rhythms from Venezuela like the joropo, and of course we have Afro-Cuban rhythms like the mambo and the cha-cha-cha, but we also have guaguancó from the rumba tradition. We have Brazilian rhythms in this new reimagining. We have funk, New Orleans second line, R&B. It's all that and a bag of chips, like we would say in the Bronx. In terms of the proceeds from the recording, part of them are going to be going to a special relief fund for Puerto Rico, and
That's great.
Particularly the musicians on the island who have been devastated in terms of there's no work for them, and many of them lost their homes, they lost their instruments, recording equipment, etc., etc. We had already done a benefit for the musicians in Puerto Rico a few months ago, so this is in continuation of that. So I'm really happy about that, and of course your father's love for Puerto Rico and all things Latino, it's in keeping with his humanitarian spirit.
It sure is. He would be so honored if he knew that you were dedicated your record and its proceeds to helping the island pull itself back together, that I'm sure if he were around, he would be doing exactly the same thing. And it really does seem as if we still need to remind everyone of that lyric from West Side Story, nobody knows in America, Puerto Rico's in America.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome, Felipe.
Thank you.
And welcome, Bobby, to the Radical Imagination. It's an honor. It's a thrill. I'm so excited to have you both here. Bobby, start us off with this monumental work that you've created. And Felipe, I know you have your show on WBAI Saturday afternoon, and you spent a lot of time exploring and playing a lot of Latino music as well. So,
well, I want Bobby to explain.
Yeah.
But first, let me just say it's Saturday from 4 to 6.
4 to 6,
on WBAI 99.5. I'll be playing some of Bobby's music, and I'll be playing some of the classics as well.
Terrific.
It's called Latin Roots.
Latin Roots.
Should be enjoyable.
It will be.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. Thank you so much for having both of us, and especially being alongside one of my heroes, Felipe, who has had a big influence on my life, because I used to listen to the first incarnation of his show, Latin Roots, on the old jazz, 24-hour jazz station in New York. Used to have WRVR on Sundays. I used to listen to that assiduously, and I was a kid growing up in the South Bronx in the Melrose Projects, kind of rejecting my culture at the time, but little by little getting back into things, oddly enough through the popularity of Santana at the time. And then finally listening to Felipe on Sundays, he would interview some of the greatest musicians that we have in our multiverse, like people like Eddie Palmieri, Tito Puente, historians like Rene Lopez, and that's when I first started realizing the majestic history that we have as a people in terms of the African diaspora in the Caribbean, particularly Puerto Rico and Cuba, and the Dominican Republic. But in terms of this new reimagining, this started 10 years ago at the Manhattan School of Music, where I'm a faculty member. I teach the Afro-Cuban Jazz Orchestra then, and I do themes for every concert. And that particular time, the theme was movie soundtracks. So I did different excerpts of different popular movies that had touched me, and I said, we got to conclude with the Mambo Gym scene of West Side Story. Okay. So we did. I had one of my then students, Danny Rivera, who's a great baritone saxophonist, composer, arranger. I said, Danny, this is your homework assignment. Do the gym scene, but do something different with it. Let's talk about it, etc. And it was fabulous. Standing ovation, the whole thing at the end. So then I put that in the back of my head, and I said, wow, I'm going to really, one day I'm going to recreate the whole entire score of West Side Story, but in a new, different way. So 3 years ago, I started in earnest, knowing that the 60th anniversary was coming up in 2017, and my 60th birthday, parenthetically. And we did a fabulous concert last February 2017, recreating the whole score with new arrangements, etc.
You had listened to Bernstein's work as a younger man.
I had been exposed to it first on the 10th anniversary of the movie in 1971. My parents Jose and Juanita, took me and my sister Joanne to the largest theater in the Bronx, the Lowest Paradise. It holds about 3,000 people, and we saw the movie. And
How old were you then now?
1971, so I'm like 13, 14.
So what'd you think?
I was flabbergasted. I
Really?
was completely, my jaw dropped. Because from every aspect, the visuals, the choreography, the music, and then obviously I was very enamored with the fact that somebody was depicting the New York Puerto Rican experience. Not the experience on the island. I'm talking about specifically the New York Puerto Rican experience of my parents' time period, the 1950s, where they went through so much discrimination and pain, etc. And we suffered some of that as well, my sister and me. But what they went through was really unnerving. And it just spoke to me in a way that nothing before that had spoken to me. I know there's a lot of people in the Puerto Rican intellectual community that criticize the movie. We can get into that later. But really, it was really subtle and nuanced, which are the great art is always defined by that subtlety and nuance. The way the four creators, Jerome Robbins, who first envisioned it, the choreographer, Maestro Bernstein with the music, Arthur Lawrence, who wrote the book, and Stephen Sondheim, who wrote the lyrics, along with Leonard Bernstein, who contributed some of the lyrics. But he gave all the credit to Sondheim.
We can go on the history of this.
How they came,
incredible.
Yeah, how they came together, these four geniuses,
right,
and address the fact of how do we deal with hate, discrimination, bigotry, disrespect, envy, jealousy. And we're still dealing with those things today, especially now. It's so timely with the immigration issues we're facing.
Absolutely. Among so many people. And originally, right, the play was set originally for Irish American and a Jewish couple.
Right. It was
right?
supposed to.
Passover
it was supposed to be. It was called originally East Side Story.
East Side Story.
The way Jerome Robbins.
The anti-Semitism that was being dealt with, and so on.
Right. But Arthur Lawrence told him, "This is like A.B.'s Irish Rose. This has been done before." So they shelved the concept, and believe it or not, Arthur Lawrence and Leonard Bernstein had a meeting in Los Angeles because he was conducting at the Hollywood Bowl at the time. Lawrence was writing the book for a movie at the time, and Leonard Bernstein had been reading the papers in Los Angeles. So he said, hey, maybe we could do this with Chicano gangs or something like that. And Arthur Lawrence told him, Lenny, Chicano gangs, I don't know anything about Chicano gangs. I'm from New York. So they shelved it. And then finally, in 1955, they came around to it again with the growing migration of Puerto Ricans
Yes,
and the
that
gang
needs
culture.
to be pointed out. Yeah,
the gang culture.
by hundreds
etc.
of thousands
Exactly.
making their way.
And that's when they came back to it and were inspired to recreate it in a different way.
And you, of course, are also impacted by this
no doubt.
events, the history, the struggles that you were going through growing up, dealing with, as Bobby's talking about, the hate, the discrimination, the anger, the fury, and so on. So did this also ring true to you? When was the first time you saw this?
I first heard about West Side Story in 1957 when it opened. We were given free tickets to go. And during that period, I was so involved in the streets that I didn't want to go to the theater. To this day, I rue the day I said I'm not going to West Side Story, the original.
So wait, how old were you?
I was in the 4th grade.
And
And they had given us tickets.
You were organizing on the streets?
I was into playing, I was into playing Skelly. I was
Oh,
into playing
okay,
Skelly.
okay, all right.
And games like Hot Peas in Bud and 52 cards, you know, you get 52 cards and you play them and you hit guys on knuckles. It was crazy. But I was into the streets.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand the aesthetic of a guy like Bernstein. I was living Puerto Rican. I didn't have to see it on the screen. However, the movie for me, the play, which then turned into a movie, is one of the most incredible experiences of my life.
Like Bobby's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to talk about Bobby's reimagining, but the Bernstein revival was unbelievable. To this day, the songs resound with me.
And very politically subversive.
Very, very. But apart from the politics, the lyricism, for me, Maria is one of the most beautiful songs I have ever heard. And if you hear Johnny Mathis's version of it, you will never, ever forget it again. Johnny Mathis took it to another level. When you hear Make of Our Hands, One Hand, Make of Our Hearts, One Heart, I mean, these were things that, I mean, I'm getting emotional just talking about it. When you hear not Sunrise, Sunset, I'm thinking of Fiddle on the Roof. This is our Fiddle on the Roof.
Yeah.
When some of the other songs are so beautifully lyrical, so beautifully written, that to this day, whenever I see a rendition of West Side Story, I run to the movie house to see it. I'd like to get caught up in the politically correct paradigm of saying George Chakiris wasn't Puerto Rican, and so many of the people weren't Puerto Rican. That's not the point. The point that's, for me, the point is that someone saw what we were going through in the 50s. Now, while my brother talks about the immigration and it was coming, remember, we had just become a Commonwealth in 1952, and they were pouring into New York City. Whenever I see Puerto Ricans in Chicago or in Philadelphia or Florida, and they try to assume the mantle of being something other than Puerto Rican, I say, you started in El Barrio like all of us did. They all came right here. From here, they moved to other areas of America.
I think it's worth pointing out, too, the economic and political reasons that this forced migration occurred.
Well, there have been 4 major exoduses from Puerto Rico, all of them the result of financial mishaps, financial corruption. The first was 1898, when the United States took over Puerto Rico, and many Puerto Ricans came here because they felt that if we're going to be fine with the model for democracy, then we'll even be better if we go there. So many of them left and came to New York City. That was the first forced migration, because remember, when the Americans came to Guanica in 1898, we were basically a farm community, small farms, basically sugar.
Right.
That sugar began slowly after a major hurricane in Puerto Rico. That sugarcane economy collapsed, and then they went into coffee.
That was 1929, that gigantic hurricane that hit the island.
It was very bad. It really just, so you think this was bad. Maria was bad. This killed thousands. So now they come here. Then the next major migration, there were just too many people, not enough food. My grandmother talks about this all the time. Well, she's passed now. She said, I remember bloated stomachs and red hair, which classic signs of malnutrition. The next move out is they forced them, or they gave them ample opportunity to leave to go to Hawaii.
Really?
Puerto Ricans started, not that pineapple was not unknown in Hawaii,
Right.
but we developed the industry. So every, and by the way, Puerto Rican pineapples are the best in the world. Everyone says it. So we went to Puerto, and I still have uncles there who stayed there. That was the 1930s. Slave conditions, plantation-like situation, discrimination, racism, and pure brutality. The next migration was the 1945.
40s and 50s.
40s and 50s. Well, the war.
Industrialization, the automation
That's right.
of the agribusiness.
And then the Korean War, and then they came here.
Right.
But now the fourth one, of course, is the one we have now with Maria. They can't contain the population. The infrastructure is fragile.
3 million Puerto Ricans, right? Still?
3.5 million in Puerto Rico.
How many in America?
About 6.
Amazing.
And we're moving faster.
There's more people here than on the island.
On the island.
Twice as many.
We're
almost.
We're another statistic that we're famous for. We're responsible for the largest mass migration of a people in modern history.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so the music and the poetry that you were involved in, and the art, was so crucial to establishing a sense of a purpose and identity, right?
You know what it is? It's amazing that an island 30 miles wide by 100 miles long has contributed so greatly to world culture. We tend to get myopic and think it's just here, but our soldiers in World War II took it to France, took it to England, and if they were in the Pacific Theater, they took it to Japan. To this day, Japan is one of the most passionate nations about Latin music. Our guys, wherever the soldiers have gone, wherever Puerto Ricans have gone, we take our music with us. And to this day, if you go to Italy and you say you're Puerto Rican, and the first thing they want to do is they want to dance. I went to Germany. I found more Tito Puente records in Germany than I ever found here. It is amazing. Russia. I went to China in 1972, and I brought Eddie Palmieri with me. They flipped out. Morris Levy at the time was tried to contact me in Hong Kong because he wanted to send records to me. Morris Levy was the former president of Roulette Records and Tico Records, and wanted me to try to sell the Chinese. Morris was always thinking of a deal. Try to sell the Chinese on Latin music, and I know they would have loved it. They use bamboo sheaves, small, that are like castanets, and little vertical sheaves about an inch, 5 inches long, 1 inch wide, and they do it just like castanets. And they would do that as I was playing muñeca. So it was an incredible experience for me.
Did you?
We've had a major impact on the world.
Was that your experience too, Bobby, as you've toured with your
Oh
music?
yeah. I mean, the thing is, especially if you tell people you're from the Bronx, they take a step back. If you tell them from the South Bronx, they take 2 steps back. There's no doubt about it. In terms of New York City, if we just want to talk about New York, Felipe's talking about the world, but just New York, the Puerto Rican community was transformative in every aspect: theater, poetry, dance, education, bilingual education. We're responsible for that.
Herman Badillo in particular.
Yeah, of course, and of course, music, culture. We made this city a cauldron of rhythm and vibrancy, and we've never been given credit for that. So in this West Side Story Reimagined a project that I've done, it does that, and if you hear it just on CD, you get that right away, and then if you view it live, like we're going to do it August 10th at Lincoln Center, you'll certainly get that. Without our community, this city doesn't exist.
That's right. That's a very good point. Understand that we had 4 major groups in the city, 5. We had, of course, Puerto Ricans. We had Jewish Americans on the Lower East Side and in Flatbush. We had Italian Americans here in East Harlem. Tremendous gang fights and everything. We had the Irish Americans, and we had Black Americans. Now, and there was tension, and a lot of people died, and there were a lot of gang fights, and a lot of gangs were formed as neighborhood protection associations.
As you well know.
As I well know, because I joined some of them.
You joined some?
And I co-founded the Young Lords to protect ourselves.
Bobby, you didn't, or were you involved in? You were.
I was
in your music.
He was a good boy. He was
but,
a good boy.
No,
he's a good boy chick.
But he had the music.
It's funny because
the
culture, the gang culture that I grew up in was the 70s, which was the Black Spades, the Savage Nomads, the 7 Immortals, the Golden Guineas, all these different groups, all these different gangs that existed in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, and also in the North Bronx. And as Felipe said, these were basically groups of young men who banded together to protect the neighborhood, the territorial imperative, as scientists would say, or anthropologists would say. But they said they gave you a sense of belonging, a sense of community, etc. And then they were a reflection of the devastation that was happening at the time in New York City. The city was bankrupt. The landlords were burning the buildings in the South Bronx to collect the insurance money. This was all an aftermath of anyone who studies the history of New York, of the building of the Cross Bronx Expressway and the Bruckner Expressway by Robert Moses.
Displaced hundreds of thousands of people. So
we should give credit to Bobby Sanabria's mother and father, because he was able to extricate himself from the milieu of the gang, which is very, very strong. He was able to say, I'm going to discipline myself, and I believe all musicians are basically phenomenal mathematicians, because you have to learn those notes. There's 16ths, there's 32nds, there's eighth notes, quarter notes. You got to know this stuff, you have to memorize it. He was able to do it, and in percussion sometimes it's even harder. He was able to do that. How does one decide not to be part of the wall? How does one decide not to be part of what is happening right outside your window? So the discipline that he had to exert, the faith in the vision that he had to exert, never ceases to amaze me. He was able to say, fellas, it'd be nice, I know what you're doing, I got it. I can't do that. I want to play drums, I want to do something with my life.
Was there music in your house?
And I would say there was music in every Puerto Rican and African American household at that time. Jazz was still part of the mainstream of American culture at that time. You saw jazz on TV with shows like The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, The Merv Griffin Show, and Ed Sullivan, David Frost. All these. When the Beatles came to New York City, I believe in 1964, I saw that and I was affected by that, like every young person was at the time. And I sang all those songs in the hallway, whatever, She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, and all that stuff. But when I saw the Count Basie Orchestra on the Ed Sullivan Show, or Duke Ellington, or Buddy Rich's big band, and any number of great jazz artists that I would see on TV, that emotionally affected me more.
The big band sound is okay.
Exactly, and I would always see that the drummers were at the vortex of everything. And then, of course, seeing in my household, I would say that my father was a reflection of many Puerto Rican, New Yorker men at the time, in that besides listening to the native music of Puerto Rico from the Jíbaro mountain music tradition, and from our African, Puerto Rican roots, the bomba and the plena, we heard that in the household. But we also listened to Mexican mariachi music because the Puerto Rican community was always big on seeing the films that were being produced in Mexico. Mexico had an incredible film industry in the 1950s, rivaling that of music. Rivaling that of Hollywood. We went to see those films at places like the Teatro Puerto Rico, the Teatro San Juan. So we were very familiar with that, as was Bernstein. That's why in America, why in America he uses the huapango, which is a rhythm from Mexico, to showcase the comedic side of the
West Side Story.
Yeah, right. Of the didactic of like, Anita is saying, I want to live in America. Everything's all right in America, and then Bernardo, the males, Puerto Rican men, countering that with the other argument, if you're all white in America. So I was, besides all of that, my father's listening to Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Machito and his Afro-Cubans, Tito Puente, etc. These were all my heroes growing up. Jazz radio was big in New York, and jazz was everywhere, in the cartoons, everything.
It should be noticed also, it should be remembered that we are a tropical people. Our muse is nature, Yuki-Yu. Our muse is the mountains, the Caribbean, the sand, the food. Remember, Taínos didn't have poverty. The Taínos were very peaceful people. We still have an incredible amount of DNA in us that points right to the Taíno Indians, Taíno Native Americans. We're romantic people. And it was difficult for us. And the men, though they mess up and they mess up horribly sometimes, are very, very attached to family. So the Mexican music...
As you see in West Side Story.
As you see in West Side Story. Mexican music is extremely romantic. The trios, los panchos, los haces, they're phenomenal. If you wanted to make it in Latin music and you were in Cuba, you went to Mexico City. Perez Prado did that. Benny Moré did that. So Chico Farrell had to do that. Many, many people had to go to Mexico at that time because of the film industry, because of the recording industry. But I remember in the 50s, growing up in the projects, the Johnson projects of New York, as the guys were washing their secondhand cars, listening to Marco Antonio Muniz, listening to Gilberto Monroy, listening to Trio Vega Bajeño, listening to incredible trio music. I hated it. I thought it was, I called it 333, ding, 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 always guitars. I now own just about every record there is of trio music in Latin music. I love Los Panchos. Edie Gourmet, who is a Sephardic Jew, was
from the Bronx.
Who loved this music. What I'm trying to get at is that we are a romantic people, and we still hold on to that tradition. That's why the rupture in terms of what they did in Lincoln Center. Remember, Herman Badillo was relocation commissioner under Wagner. They declared eminent domain, and they took all of those Puerto Ricans from San Juan Hill and they threw them into the South Bronx. That's how the South Bronx started. And then, of course, he ran for
mayor.
No, for borough president. And then he went to mayor. But it was a wholesale
selling out of one's people.
In a sense,
in the neighborhood.
I don't think he had. Well, he was ambitious and he wanted to move forward. It was a done deal. It was going to be done. The question is, would I have been the one to do that? But he did.
But was he partly also operating under the so-called American dream that this is what one does as you move in and you integrate? And
Herman was
so
a fascinating figure, and there were a lot of contradictory elements with him, as there are with any man. First of all, he was the first one who introduced the whole concept of bilingual education. The first one. No one. He was the first Puerto Rican congressman. He went against the Italian political machine here, and he went against the Jewish and Irish machine in the Bronx. This was a tough guy.
Although he married a Jewish.
Although he married a Jewish guy, and I know her very well. It was a very difficult time to be Puerto Rican, and he was not only Puerto Rican, but he was tall.
Yeah.
He was it was so unusual to see this guy walk into El Barrio. He wasn't afraid of much. And I spoke to Father Louis Giganti, who was Italian. This used to be a Sicilian neighborhood, all of it. And Father was the Barrio priest. And he was threatened. But he was threatened with his life. He said, I'm not leaving. And he stayed. You got to give him credit for that. That he became conservative later is a result of one, chronology, but also he was hurt very badly by the Democrats' decision to spurn him as the Democratic mayor, because he was a front runner. He was going to become mayor of this town, and he was spurned by black Democrats, and that caused a tremendous rupture.
He first ran as a progressive, didn't he?
He was very much a progressive.
Yeah, he tried.
Charlotte Street is his idea. Jimmy Carter then reneged on him, but it was his idea. He wanted to spread that throughout the United States.
I'm talking about the rebuilding of Charlotte Street and the South Bronx.
Yeah, and that gets us into some of the work that you've both been involved in, right? Voter registration and getting out. You're going to hopefully have a interview with Reverend Barber and fusion politics.
On my radio program,
Absolutely. More of the Puerto Rican and Latino community involved in the movement, New People's Campaign. and getting out there and becoming a major political force, which they
But
can be.
Yeah, but here's
Right, and which is also expressed in certain ways.
Well,
with
talking
West Side
about
Story.
talking about Charlotte Street, I'm the co-artistic director along with Elena Martinez of the Bronx Music Heritage Center. We're like a block down from Charlotte Street, where Jimmy Carter and everybody came. That famous photo op that they did,
like
and it looked
bombing
like
of Dresden.
right,
there was no
exactly,
buildings,
exactly, and all that
rubble.
all that has been rebuilt.
Right.
You know, and every
Right.
time I get a kick out of it because Al Pacino grew up in that neighborhood. So he went to junior high school in that neighborhood, Herman Ritter Junior High School. So I would get a kick out of thinking.
Didn't David Valentin go there too?
I believe so too, but the great Puerto Rican flute player, maybe rest in peace. But I always get a kick because wow, I can imagine Al Pacino growing up in this neighborhood and just taking a subway, going to auditions, and going to his classes, acting classes, etc. Back in the
The
day.
differences are amazing. Bobby chose music.
Yeah,
I chose politics.
yeah, you sure did.
And just to finish off the answer to your question, how did I escape that the gang culture? My gang became fellow musicians, etc. And because of that, and I was already doing gigs, playing timbales with local bands when I was 14, 15. So everybody in the neighborhood knew that, and they admired that out of me, and so cats left me alone. Not that it wasn't available to me if I wanted to. I knew those
And
people.
you were attracting the women, right? So that always helps.
Well, I mean, it gave you a little bit of what I call ghetto celebrity status.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay. Well,
but it's I remember vividly going through the snow carrying a set of timbales and a cymbal, walking to the subway in East 149th Street and 3rd Avenue from 153rd Street and Cortland Avenue to go to a gig somewhere on the Lower East Side or in Brooklyn or whatever. I'm a 14, 15-year-old kid doing that. And then coming back at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and people would see me, some people were leaving for work or whatever, and they smile or whatever, or somebody from the African American community. All right, you go on, young man, you know, etc. Because everybody was attuned to music back in those days. Because the New York City
radio was a big thing.
New York City had one of the best music programs, starting in junior high all the way through high school in the country, and all that was taken away when the city through malfeasance and when the city went bankrupt. The first thing they did was cut the arts.
What are the young kids listening to now?
The kids are listening to a variety of music, and we should understand that it's not only black and Puerto Rican, it's Mexican, it's Guatemalan, it's Salvadorian, it's Argentinian, it's Chilean, it's Honduran, the Garifuna music. Whenever I lecture in
Middle Eastern?
Middle Eastern, you hear there are some very proud Yemenites who put their music on loud in their cars. We have Moroccans who are in the city. We have Malians and people from Cote d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, who are playing their music, Youssou N'Dour. And by the way, Senegal is one of the great lovers of Latin music. We have a guy named Labe Sosa who used to sing here with Johnny Pacheco at the Corso. Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Guinea, those are places that love Latin music. So you're getting an enormous amount of music, and though you may not be conscious of it, it's seeping into your subconscious.
Just like it was
It's
with you.
seeping in slowly. Listen,
beautiful,
I just heard
subversive.
I just heard a Mexican grunge group. How is that possible? Where did they get into grunge? The Mexicans now in this town, who we thought were cultureless, are now developing a whole new underground culture of rap, of punk music. It's incredible what's going on. Now, the problem is they're beginning to talk about the cartels. And since the cartels have had such a prominent role to play in Mexican society, they're talking about the cartels and how they're strong and how, because if all you have is weakness, what you extol is strength. And they're extolling the strength of the cartels. It's amazing what's going on in Mexico and in Tijuana.
So at the same time, this musical vibrancy is linked and mixed with
Afro-Caribbean.
Also that, and also the gang violence, too, and the cartel.
Well,
how is that all?
Well, there's no way.
Taboo.
I always say warriors are attracted to life and movement. And if you are a warrior, musical, political, you're going to want to dance. You're going to want to do something. Music is a manifestation, I think, of the God within. And what happens is, if the music reflects both rhythmically and lyrically your reality, you're with it. Machito in the 40s used to talk about Stalin, Hitler, Roosevelt, all of that stuff. Talk about boy-girl relationships. The contradiction of saying si and then saying no. Si, si, no, no. All kinds of sexual allusions. Most Cuban music is double entendre anyway. Later on, it was Jackie Wilson and it was Elvis Presley. You ain't nothing but a Big Mama Thornton and all that stuff. Now, very few, with the exception, notable exception, of Bobby, Ruben Blades, Calle 54, right? Jerry Gonzalez and Fort Apache. Those kinds of groups did come out and reflect the spectrum of Puerto Rican political and cultural thought. Yes, rap has had a deleterious effect on the thinking of a lot of little gangsters, but they're only reflecting the culture as they see it.
And let's remember, West Side Story is an incredibly romantic story, but it's a tragedy. There's violence.
What did you call it, an American tragedy?
Well, I mean, if you want to go back further, the roots of West Side Story and what Bernstein envisioned music, you got to go back to Carmen, because there's this tragedy, pathos, violence, etc., romance, and all of those things.
Rhythms too.
Yeah, right, exactly. But the thing is that what Maestro Bernstein did is he had a unique sense of not only his mastery of the symphonic toolkit at his disposal, but also American popular culture and a deep respect for all types of music. He would respect a simple melody like Mary Had a Little Lamb, just as he would with the same kind of respect that he had for a piece by Mahler. Yeah. So and then the other thing about him too was he wasn't just a classically trained musician that talked about American popular music and giving it lip service, saying, oh yeah, jazz is great. Oh, Broadway show music is great. No, he could actually play jazz. He could actually play boogie woogie piano. He knew the history of the Broadway musical theater, et cetera, et cetera. He could sit in with a jazz group in Mittens in Harlem, and of course conduct the Boston Symphony, the New York Philharmonic.
And Bobby is a reflection of that. Bobby manifests that kind of renaissance where he's not only political, but he's also very much in love with different kinds of rhythms. Now, what I happen to...
And in love with love.
And love with love. And love with the music. And I happen to love his incredible involvement in Puerto Rican music. What he's done with the Latin population in this town is he's given them a new sense of purpose, a new sense of mission. Listen to the sound. Listen, when you see him playing at the front of an orchestra, and you see his passion, and you see him flailing, arms flailing, I'm wondering if he's going to drop dead at any minute because he's so passionate. I get scared. But he's there, and it has given us all a reason
like
to
Coltrane.
be proud. Well, yeah, sheets of sound. It was there. So there's a tremendous. I love playing his music. Again, I just want to remind people we have this show Saturday.
Let's make sure
every
we all
Saturday on
understand
WBAI 99.5 Latin Roots from 4 to 6, and Bobby's music this Saturday will be prominently displayed. Sound.
And we have August 10th. We're going to be performing West Side Story Reimagined.
Oh yes. With
my 21-piece multiverse big band, which is. This year is interesting. I failed to mention it, and I want to mention it now. This is the 20th year that this orchestra exists. We are the oldest continuously run orchestra that deals with the Latin jazz continuum in this city. I'm very proud of that. And the reason we call it the multiverse is because we have young
the multiverse. Sun Ra and the multiverse.
We have young people in the orchestra, older people, etc. The age span of this orchestra is incredible. It's multi-ethnic, multiracial, We have women in the orchestra, etc. And which is
It goes back to your days listening to, you mentioned Count Basie, right?
yeah, all of these things that I grew up
Bay
listening.
Goodman?
Yeah.
Listen, I listened.
everything,
It was 1959. I'm on 112th Street, and I hear "Skies of America" by Ornette Coleman. It took me out. I have never heard anything so incredibly dissonant and crazy and lovely, and I never forgot it. To this day, avant-garde music for me, Anthony Braxton, Henry Threadgill, Oliver Lake, I love this stuff. Bobby comes from a jazz tradition, and that helps him in his Latin music. So I come from that too. I like it outside. I'm very outside.
I got to interrupt you because before this story escapes my mind, you're talking about Ornette. The famous story. Charlie Hayden is playing at the 5 spot, I think, with Ornette. He's taking every time he would take a bass solo, he'd close his eyes. So he opens his eyes and he sees a guy kneeling with his ear right in front of the F hole of the acoustic bass, and he's going, "Hey, who the F are you? Get the hell!" And Ornette goes to him, "Hey, man, that's Leonard Bernstein." and Charlie Hayden goes, "Who the F is Leonard Bernstein?"
Oh my God.
So that's the kind of man he was. He was always checking out new things and embracing them, and etc. He very much.
What a wonderful story.
Very much inspired by one of his conducting mentors, Serge Koussevitzky, who was the conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. He was into avant-garde composers, new composers, and everything.
We could go on and on. We've got so much more to talk about. What's going to happen in Puerto Rico? Your money, the help is coming.
Oh,
just the last few seconds we have.
The West Side Story Reimagined recording is 2 CDs, an hour and a half worth of music, 16-page booklet with rare photos of the maestro and us when we recorded this live at Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola last November 19, 2017.
And you can go to your webpage on this, right?
You can get it at Amazon, you can get it at jazzheads.com, and the money goes to Puerto Rico for the musicians.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Viva Puerto Rico. Thank you so much. We're gonna finish off with The Last Poets. This is you back in
reciting a poem called Jazz.
Jazz. This is terrific. Thank you so very, very much, both of you. Radical Imagination. See you next week. Jim Fredos.
Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck dead in your mouth. You dig it? Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck all in your mouth. Jazz is a tongue cool, licking you slowly, revolving around your side, your cheeks, letting you know who's come to visit, or teasing and tickling your teeth, buffing them till they shine, sparkle, or hot, wet like the black streets in El Barrio after a quick sun shower. Tropical jungle seething with blackness, brownness, the mist rises from the picture in your mind, the hot, wet tongue that leads and pulls and drags you away to bed and fucks you to death. And it happens so quickly. Remembrances of steaming brown eyes, waves of black hair lapping her face, and that tongue she used to moisten her dry lips and stick out and play. Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck in your ear, your navel, your belly button. Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck, yeah. All right. Jazz puts you on a swing in a project playground, backward all the way, as someone giving you a push runs backward to start you on your journey up. But first, back to the girl who lived next door to Papo's house, you dig it? Oh, yeah. And she ran up the stairs with her flower print skirt quivering, and I caught her in the pea-smelling hallway, and we both laughed and panted and didn't care about we were too young. We latched on and she held and I held, and under the canopy of a flower print skirt and through the zipper of torn corduroy pants, brown babies were born. Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck dead in your motherfucking mouth. You dig it? Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck all in your ear. Jazz fills your ears, all of them. Explodes in your outer ear, your middle ear, and your inner ear with black sound that moves inward like well-trained gorillas. And Jackie McLean carries you on a wind from the days of Bird and Tears, Young Train and Miles, and tells you in one breath it was all part of the same trip. Jazz, woman's tongue stuck in between your toes, in your ear, in your hair. Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck all in your mouth, yeah. Jazz is biting, clawing, hurting. Jazz is speeches on 125th Street and 7th Avenue to a skeleton that used to be Michaud's in favor of the first half-white, half-black office building in Harlem. And everybody except the people in Harlem are happy. Now swing, swing, and come down forward to Cleveland. And Big Cop's dead, dead, blood spurting out of festering blue holes. Big Cop's dead for fucking around with black folk. And the air of new rebellions and old wine bottles stuffed in tampons and filled with gasoline. Jazz, yeah, is a woman's tongue stuck all in your mouth.